I'm wondering what you make of what's happening within Major League Baseball and whether that's a warning for the broader society once we start to get back towards reopening schools and things like that. You're seeing increased outbreaks relative to what's happening in the other sports, which are in more of a bubble environment. Major League Baseball obviously is not. What's your take from what you see?
My take is this is highly infectious, and you're right, Major League Baseball didn't do what the NBA did, put in place a really strict bubble around the players and the players' families, for that matter. So, especially when this gets into a clubhouse where people are in close proximity, it spreads very quickly. I think it is a warning what could potentially happen if we're not very careful with the schools. And, the question is going to become, when do you close a school? And that really wasn't addressed by the CDC. We're going to see outbreaks in these schools. And the question is, what are local districts going to do when that happens? I think what you're going to see, unfortunately, is a lot of schools open. There's going to be, unfortunately, outbreaks in those settings. You're going to see a lot of schools closed, and it's going to be really hard to get them reopened. I think we need to address that very carefully around what the circumstance and the trigger would be for when you would close the schools to try to keep them open as long as possible.
Dr. Gottlieb, I know you have an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal today laying that out. What are the odds you think we actually get national guidance on something like that? And by the way, if you were setting the rules, what would you say? When should a school close down? What's an acceptable way of kind of dealing with it?
Well, I don't know that we're going to get any guidance that's better than what we've already gotten. I think that there needs to be some specificity around what the circumstances are that would cause a school to close. So how many cases would it take? What would you do if you had cases? You shouldn't have to close the school in perpetuity just because you have even a small outbreak. There might be circumstances where you can close the school just for a brief period of time, do a cleaning, do testing of the school population, and reopen the school. That hasn't been delineated. Certainly the CDC hasn't laid that out, and there really haven't been guidelines put out by any independent groups. So a lot of these local districts are on their own trying to figure this out. But I think that you could come up with a circumstance where if you had testing available, you could just test the population, make sure the outbreak isn't that dense, and then reopen the school. The challenges for the schools are, if you have a lot of spread in the local community, it's going to be hard to open against that backdrop. Schools aren't going to have access to testing. I think you need to make sure that you give the schools access to testing so that if there is a case in a school or a handful of cases, you can test your way out of it. Right now, a lot of districts won't have that kind of luxury, though, because they're not going to be able to get their hands on the testing. There's more testing available to professional sports teams than there are to our schools, certainly.
Hey, Doctor, they're playing the music, but very briefly, there was a story over the weekend. It goes to what Becky was talking about on the vaccine front. A number of scientists really concerned that, frankly, the administration or Washington is going to try to move too quickly on the vaccines themselves related to the election. How concerned are you about that particular issue? And would you be one of the first to take the vaccine?
If a vaccine went through a proper regulatory process, I'd have confidence in it. I think there will be pressure, and I think it's important that the FDA laid out a real clear line about what the approvability of a vaccine would be. They did that in guidance about 2-3 weeks ago.
But you take it. If it's approved, you take it.
If a vaccine goes through a proper regulatory process, absolutely. And I'm obviously on the board of Pfizer, which is one of those companies developing a vaccine and trying to come through that regulatory process.